Hello everyone, I'm Dale Dougherty with Make Magazine and Maker Faire, and I'd like to welcome you to this webcast. We're just a few days away from Maker Faire in the Bay Area, but last night somewhere near Reno, a caravan of Ford Fiestas was heading to Maker Faire, where the Fiesta will be launched as a new Ford model with new technology. A team of students from the University of Michigan and several Ford engineers left Michigan on May 13th and headed out to Maker Faire. Ford is calling it American Journey 2.0. The car's name, or one of the car's names, is AJ the Fiesta, and it's also the name of its Twitter account. It has been tweeting that it is frustrated when it is stuck in traffic, and it has been tweeting that it is happy when it arrives at its destination. It's not the driver that's tweeting, it's the car programmed to tell us what it's doing. Is it trivial that a car can tweet? Or is it a sign of new kinds of interactions that are possible when the objects around us are connected? I'm with Venkatesh Prasad.
Hi, Dale. How are you?
Prasad. He's a technical leader of the Infotronics team in the Ford Research and Advanced Engineering Division. In a discussion last summer with Prasad, he said, I work on the Internet of Things that move really fast. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. Really the car as a technology platform, what does that mean to people like makers, to developers? What is it you'd want a networked car to do? And perhaps more importantly for our audience, what kind of app would you want to build for it? So Prasad is here to talk today about the next generation of automakers. And by that he means not the automakers as big companies, but you and me, people that could build an application for a network car. So Prasad will give us a short presentation. Then we'll talk a little bit about American Journey and come back to talk about some of these ideas, take some of your questions. And that should be what we do today. But I'm kind of excited to be talking about cars as a computing platform, not just as cars that have computers in them, but really as something that anybody could participate in.
Dale, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's going to be real fun. I've clearly had a lot of fun working on this, and I think we're here at a point that's really exciting because we want to welcome the community, welcome all of us to begin tinkering and working with cars as platforms. So with that in mind, I'll sort of share a few thoughts with all of us and then take questions and then go from there. So perhaps I'll get started with this. Mm-hmm. So as we set about trying to bring all the technologies together to really see what consumers might want next and what was going to be happening in the world of connected consumers next, what we noticed was almost everything we experience about today in terms of the internet and the great value it brings to us, and in terms of the devices that we work with and live with and love, is all tuned to 0 miles an hour. So essentially, the internet as we know it is terrific, but it doesn't do a whole lot of good when we're in the car, when we're in the driver's seat. So the internet at driving speeds doesn't really provide value to us, and that internet comes to a halt, if you will, the value of the internet. So what we thought was, what would be a good way to begin setting a framework that would allow us to build value associated with the internet, but at driving speeds, and we call that internet at speed, if you will. So I think what I'm going to be sharing with you all is about a little bit about how we can start creating value to our driving experience and really create applications that are relevant for the road, if you will. And of course, we're very sensitive to safety here, and so anything we do is set in that context of not compromising any aspect of safety. So one could really ask why we want to bother with this whole effort here. It's really fascinating to realize that there are about 1 billion cars, trucks, and buses on the planet today, and most of them, if not all of them, essentially drive alone. They're not connected. They're little islands on wheels, if you will. So the real question is, what if we could connect them? Connect them in interesting ways, connect them in ways in which the driver would get value, and perhaps a lot of other parts of the ecosystem would get value, essentially, ultimately resulting in a simpler life perhaps for the driver and the passengers. So I think a whole new world of opportunities open up to all of us. So we were trying to capture the effort that we were trying to create and the value that we were trying to focus on. And we termed, we call that effort Automakers 2.0. And note the word makers is separate here. And this really is an invitation to all of us who love to tinker, to play, to create value, to write programs. And in this case, to cars, to make cars much more relevant to our lives today and bring added value. And so what we're trying to do is use Automakers 2.0 as a means of bringing developers, connecting experts, builders, makers, and users, and hence the whole social networking around the community, and hence the term 2.0, if you will, borrowed from Dale and related value that's been so well seen and described. And so what we're doing in this context is to define the car as a platform for writing code, as a platform for open innovation. And what we're also doing is, of course, providing toolkits that make these usable. So just a small note on safety, but an important one. Safety is always on our mind. And so when we create these toolkits, when we provide guidance, it's always cast in the context of not compromising safety. With the car as a platform, it's really important to realize it's about getting you to do, it's not about getting you to do more in the car. It's really about getting more done while you're in the car, while you're in the driver's seat, and certainly providing fun and value for everyone else in the car. The other aspect is it's really, I think it's, although subtle, but it's really important to note, is that it's about creating new ways to generate data, a lot of which exists today but is sitting in little islands on wheels. What we want to do is to unleash that availability of data and create new mashups of data for all the good value the data has been known to provide. So I just sort of jokingly say hello car. Hello car as a metaphor for being able to program to a car. It's about writing simple code that allows the car to express itself. What if the car responded and said hello car? And what if it really took context into account? So if you were parked, the car might respond to your program by saying hello car on the center stack on the big screen in front of you. But if you were driving, the car would recognize that, the program would recognize that contextual information and perhaps just chime hello car through your stereo system, if you will. And what if you were driving with your windows down with a lot of noise? Perhaps your seats might vibrate to a Morse code, if you will, that says hello car. And so there's various ways by which the car could respond to you as a programmer, to you as a user, and that's the fun that we want to introduce and make happen. So what would this need? I mean, this is at the basic foundational level. You need the toolkits and you need the language to be able to use those toolkits and get the value that you're seeking. And so clearly there's a car programming language that's needed. Perhaps it's a recreation, it's a rewrite of existing languages. But that book is yet to be written. But the Hello Car exercise will certainly be the first chapter on that. So you might wonder what Ford is doing in this context, and really what we're up to is creating application programming interfaces, APIs that are relevant for the road, APIs that ensure that safety is not compromised, security, privacy, usability, and reliability are all central to what these APIs will take into consideration. And obviously it's about creating a lot of exciting applications that can be used on the road. And it's about creating research platforms. It's about allowing us to really understand what this new value proposition is going to be. We're working with universities, trying to teach classes, engaging students. As Dale pointed out, it's those students who are in one of the cars, one of the Ford Fiestas that was driven by them out from Michigan, and they're coming to Maker Faire today. And then certainly this is an invitation to all of us, to all of you, to come and be able to be part of this new community and this new value proposition of being able to program to a car. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prasad. So let's talk about this in a second, but I thought we'd set up the American journey. Yeah. We have a short video here, and we want to, it kind of gives you some example of the applications that are possible here. And as we're watching, I see a question coming. Can you see the cars at Maker Faire? The Ford Fiestas will be at Maker Faire.
This has been a really exciting opportunity for us. Being able to work with Ford has been tremendous, Microsoft and Intel. The thing that it's really meant the most to me is giving our students access to a real industrial partner so they can get their hands dirty on something that really makes a difference.
We built the fuel tracker. The interface shows you your fuel used over the past half hour. That encourages people to change how they drive. When you see the EPA number, you're motivated to beat it. But when you can see in real time how well you're doing, that really helps.
Information about the individual rider, including their gender and their age, and also compatibility profile that's generated from Facebook.
So the Green Ride Challenge represents a new way of how we move and will help bring greenhouse emissions to a dead end.
You can rate a place based on your experience. So you can record your own recommendation here.
At the end, you can share it using whatever sources you want to share. So you can either put it on your blogs or on your social networks, or you can put it everywhere. We wanted to build an application that we could use every day. We looked at the problem of driving that we face. You got a lot of unforeseen traffic, a lot of road closures, seasonal construction happens, and a lot of unforeseen weather. So what we wanted to do with that is we wanted to build a way for people to see that in real time and know what roads to take, what roads not to take, etc. Basically, it's a Netflix-style recommendation system for places. If you're trying to find a restaurant, a club, or maybe you're just in a completely new area and you want to explore the place. That's what this application is for. It will try and learn your tastes over time and give you better recommendations.
Video gives us a pretty good example of some of the different specific applications. You worked with the University of Michigan.
Yep.
and got students into a program where they could see what was possible, and you wanted to see a dozen or more applications. You picked a couple.
That's right.
And one team Bobcat, is coming out here in there. So they're coming with a group of cars. Tell us what's going to be at Maker Faire.
So it's really exciting. There's going to be 3 Ford Fiestas. One of them is going to be having the apps that were programmed by the students, and that's the car that tweets and certainly has a Caravan app as its primary application. There's another car that was programmed to by the engineers at Ford, and actually a very fascinating development took place during the course of this whole effort. The crowds within Ford started getting excited about being able to program to a car, and so they too wanted to be part of this whole effort. And so you'll see the second car there that has applications programmed to by the Ford team, and that has also this car that tweets. That's AJ the Fiesta. That's the Twitter handle. And then there's a third car that's a production car that is the kind of car that you can buy today if you wish. And so that tells you what's there today in today's technology. This is a technology called Sync that allows connectivity. The other 2 cars have a research platform, and so we wanted to show what's there today and readily available in case people wanted to know what's there today to buy.
Just on a practical level, tell me what the students had to do. Just they wrote code on a computer,
Yep.
right? And then they had to connect it to the car somehow.
Yeah.
Did they have like a sort of a cross-compiler environment or a simulation that they were working in?
Yeah, so they had this environment in which they could essentially create code, integrate code on a laptop, and then bring the code down into the vehicle environment, and then go through a fairly careful thought process of what might be relevant for the driver, what might be okay when the driver was parked, what might be okay when the driver had a passenger, so the passenger could actually look at visual information. And so to do that, they were actually taught. We had a series of lectures in which experts came in, and it included experts in automotive safety, in the design of interfaces for safety. And so there were a couple of lectures by these experts, people who spent 25, 30 years in this field. And then there was a lot of material pointers to the literature out there in terms of guidelines and related material. that you might think is sort of peripheral to the core fun of programming, but it's really relevant if you want to get something on a car. And so the second thing that it was to port these applications into an actual vehicle environment, and then tune it to make sure that the response times are right for them to be able to use it in the car, to make sure that the contrast of the displays, if there were displays, was just right for the right, given the right context. So lots of things that you might consider to be plain old engineering, but really with the kids being able to bring the innovation and the ideas in to be able to program off in a sort of lab environment, and then to be able to bridge that creativity in the form of code with the code in the car was really fascinating. And then so they went through all these steps, writing code, first of all creating ideas, transferring that to code, using the application programming interface that included messages and access to the vehicle. And getting information from the vehicle. So that piece of the API was an integral part of the code that they of the API suite that they developed the code against. And so they wrote their code on laptops and in a lab programming environment.
Could you talk about one of the applications that sort of showed some of the features that you were kind of either surprised or delighted to see the students do?
Well, with a Caravan app, that's a good one. Caravan app allows you to essentially speak to your friends or others in a caravan who are traveling out with you. And so if you need to have a break, or you want to plan a detour in your destination or add a waypoint, you can just essentially press a button or send a very brief message depending on how you program the environment, and that gets broadcast to everyone else in your platoon. That's what the kids did. And so while you can do this today, you can certainly place a phone call to one of the individuals, and that person can then call somebody else, in a third vehicle, if you will. All these take a number of steps. So really, I think the most fascinating aspect of what was done was the fact that you could essentially reduce the number of steps that it takes to do the obvious. So if I'm traveling in a caravan with 3 other cars, I'd like to broadcast some information between cars. And so a Caravan app enables you to do that. Okay.
Just a quick question from John McBride. What language was the code written in?
C#, and then there was a lot of other scripting languages. Right. But really, from our perspective, what's really important to understand is that the programming language, the actual underlying infrastructure and tools are going to be optimized for whatever might be the most convenient and most widely available set of tools. We really want to encourage the ease with which programmers and creative people can come and start programming to the vehicle. So it's much less about the actual programming language, although it's very important. It's much less about the actual OS, although that's really important. And we have some terrific partners. Microsoft brought the OS and Intel brought the hardware platform. It was real fun. But it's really about being agnostic to the specific implementation details and saying that you have application programming interfaces that you can now use to program to the car.
Okay. So in the simplest example, and we have the American Journey web page up there now, so you can kind of see the location of the car. It's moved from Sacramento. It's getting closer to the Bay Area. But I mean, in its simplest kinds of things is having a GPS system that's communicating to the cloud. Right. And telling an app where you are. Yeah. This is not that much different than Foursquare. In fact, that's what's happening with some of the Twitter feeds.
That's
here.
Right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Right. So I think what's really fascinating is that the car now, in this case, not the driver, but the car is able to essentially say where it is and register itself at Foursquare and essentially broadcast that piece of information. You can then imagine how a whole family of applications can be spawned off of that piece. Because if you know where the vehicle is, where the vehicle is likely to be, and Foursquare is able to then publish it out to other interested parties, there's a whole ecosystem around producing services associated with the fact that your car is coming there. And maybe there's 4 people sitting in the car, and therefore you're looking for whether it's 4 seats in a restaurant or whether it's 4 tickets at a theater. There's a whole set of offerings that can essentially be generated through that kind of a value proposition.
But I find just at Foursquare, it's more interesting to me like where I'm going than where I am.
That's right. Often,
it would be nice to have it do that. But so in many ways, do you see Ford and others like having app stores in the future?
Well, I think we've clearly been given it a lot of thought. We think that we don't want to place another vending machine when there's some pretty exciting vending machines already out there. So at this point, we think that what we really are passionate about is inviting communities to create apps and we want the apps to be found in places where people naturally go to. So we might have some ways to point them to a car-relevant app. So imagine one of your favorite app stores today, but sitting next to an app that you have today, you might have an app that looks essentially iconically very similar, but has two wheels beneath it, indicating that perhaps it's an app that's ready for the road.
A really mobile app.
That's right. So it's less about creating a new app store, but it's about more about enabling access to apps.
So a couple of questions that came in, and there is obviously privacy issues.
Yeah.
We mentioned safety. But someone's writing, they'd love to know where their car is when their teenage daughter is in the car, or particularly when she's with the boyfriend. There are devices already in the market to do some of that, so this isn't necessarily completely new. But how do you think about the scope of sharing data and where this ends up? What kind of user controls are there?
Yeah, no, I think clearly there'll be car maker or vehicle manufacturer controls based on guidelines and policy. There'll be controls placed in by the programmers. There'll be controls that the users will be able to set. At the end of the day, we think this is going to be generating a large number of applications, and end users often will have the liberty and choice to figure out what kind of setting they want, what kind of profile they would like to describe themselves through. And so that goes on today in our social networking and context. And so a lot of the people in today's world are really quite used to that.
I take that to mean we kind of don't know the best practice in this year, and
I think
we almost have to.
It'll be case by case.
We'll have sort of the two extremes.
That's right. There'll be
very restrictive and very open, and somewhere moving towards the middle.
That's it. With an easy way to opt in, if you will, if you want to participate.
So I have a number of questions here about frameworks. What kind of framework are you using? Is this a .NET framework? Is there an open source or web standards approach to what you're doing?
Yeah, so what we have is a really, what I think is a carefully layered architecture. And the architecture really says at the base level we need a good solid platform, a computing platform. It so happens we've chosen an Intel platform. It's worked out really well for us. On top of that, there's a Win 7 operating system, on top of which there's a Windows framework, robotics framework, programming environment. And on top of that, there's a cloud computing Windows Azure platform. And we've created an open source application out there that we've designed, and it's essentially been available, given to the students as part of their classwork and class tools. And the students are programmed on that open source.
What's that called?
So that's the collection, the whole stack together is called Fiestaware. Fiestaware.
I have some in my kitchen.
There you go. That's right. So it's the Fiestaware platform that's been made available to the students as a whole. And since this architecture is layered, we could mix and match the technologies, the actual implementation choice of operating systems and platforms based on what we really think is best for the community and what's best for our collective.
But you started kind of with the Microsoft stack.
Yeah, so we started with that. We use that for our teaching purposes. I think it's been both the partnerships with the firms themselves, but also the tools themselves have been a great educational exercise for us. It's an opportunity that's clearly out there, and it's very clear to our developers, to the students. Got used to that, got trained on that in a matter of weeks, and got pretty productive.
Okay. Well, Tim Thomas has a question that I wondered about naturally this morning.
Okay,
But when we talk about a network car, how is it connected? Are we using cell networks?
So in our research platform, the two Fiestas, research platform-based Fiestas that drove across from Michigan, they are connected through a 3G, 4G card, and so that's how they communicate. There's a dedicated card. You can imagine this being plugged in through a USB port. That's what they're using. In our production vehicles, we use the consumer's phone as the modem of the radio, if you will, and that then connects to the vehicle through a Bluetooth conduit. So that's what's there today. And coming up pretty soon is a Wi-Fi connectivity from the vehicle infrastructure to the consumer's devices, and certainly out there from the vehicle out to the cloud through a USB. Or some kind of interface to a high.
So you might be able to plug a Wi-Fi,
plug a Wi-Fi card,
my Wi-Fi or something in,
and the card might have Wi-Fi, MiFi, and really that would be the conduit to the cloud.
All right. So Jay asks, most cars have multiple computers. Where do the user apps live? And that's kind of, I think there's two questions there. One is, to some degree, the idea of apps is to take advantage of all the electronics that are in cars today. And secondly, when you start adding user apps, where do they go?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. In reality, really, what it is that most apps do live in the cloud. So all the apps you see on your smartphone today are really, in some sense, extensions of what's sitting out there and crunching away up in the cloud. What you have is really a user interface and a set of relevant application components that are specific to the device at hand. So in this case, if you look at the automobile, the application that's relevant to gathering data from the vehicle, presenting the data to the cloud would reside in the vehicle. Things that have to do with your personalized, customized preferences perhaps would live in a small data sheet sitting on your phone or your mobile device. And there'd be all the computing, the hard computing and the mashups that need to happen to deliver the service to you out in the cloud. So it's really going to be in what we like to call the built-in, the brought-in, and the beamed-in environment. So it's going to be distributed across these three environments. But the UI, when you drive, would certainly be in the vehicle. So the UI could be, the user interface could be in the form of a display if that's relevant. It could be in the form of an audio chime-in or an audio announcement if that's the relevant context.
But would the app be in the car, do you think, like in the sense of bits, or would it be more likely?
We would like to keep as much of the apps really out in the cloud and the relevant pieces on a mobile phone, and then just the relevant pieces we want to keep the platform in the car as thin as possible.
Right.
For all the good reasons. We don't want to be maintaining the upgrades in the car. No one really, consumers don't come to the car as the platform on which applications are hosted, if you will. So it's just a relevant piece that'll be in the car.
Okay. A few questions back on what we were talking about. Is the FiestaWare available for download? Is it available publicly yet?
We're working on the processes to do that, but just the fact that students have used this in the class and all the classwork is public. All the description of what goes into making FiestaWare is also public. So while the actual physical ware is not available in high enough volume, but the recipe and the toolkits are all there. So yes, the answer is we're working on the process to essentially make it available in a mass scale, but we also have the recipe to put that together available in the public domain.
Okay. And Tony Blank, I'll just kind of read it as more of a comment. I think Tony says, I meant web standards from a standpoint of platform neutral open standards so everyone can easily develop on all systems. So I guess that's the question. It might not be exactly Tony's question. I mean, there's one hand, it's figuring this out. You figured this out with Microsoft. There's also other car manufacturers trying to figure this out. I think when a developer looks at it, says, well, we'd like to have standards, like HTML is a standard that works across all of these systems. We're not writing a Ford Fiesta application, we're writing an auto application.
Right. Yeah, I can certainly share with you where our commitment comes from, and it's really extremely focused on making sure that we have an open platform, a platform for open innovation, a platform that poses as few hurdles, if you will, to a developer and a programmer. And so in order to do that, we've got to make sure that the programmer can use the tools of their choice, if you will, the specific technologies of their choice, but then they obviously have to use the guidelines and the application programming interfaces that we would then be defining that would get to being specific to a brand or a car manufacturer at some point. But for the most part, yes, we are committed to making sure that these things are built on standards, built so that we can get as wide a developer community as possible. And as I've said before, we've got this particular combination of technologies in a specific implementation of the architecture. But the architecture, like any good architecture, is agnostic to the choice of technologies. It's really, really important to understand that. From our standpoint, we're committed to making sure that we have a solid architecture that allows for open innovation and wide participation, and that we have a great implementation to show off and speak about, but that's an implementation. And ultimately, implementation is got to be agnostic to architecture. Architecture stays agnostic to technologies.
Yeah. But one of the things that made me think of this was similar to the App Store model is that a car manufacturer may want to validate apps as being safe, appropriate, following guidelines for user interface and things. So in some ways, it makes me think that the platforms don't want to be completely open in the sense that anybody could download any piece of code that they've written to their car.
Right, right. So I think that's clearly we've given a lot of thought to this. And so the point really is, how do you manage openness? Yes, it is open, but yes, the car is a heavy piece of steel going at high speeds, and so we really have to be sensitive in terms of how we manage what shows up and how the manifestation of these apps present themselves, if you will. So there will be a piece of what we allow that would really be, in some sense, from our perspective, not critical to the functioning of the vehicle, the safety of the vehicle. And that piece might be much more open, if you will, in terms of how the application is written and how it presents itself. And maybe it's an application that works only when you're parked and safe in that sense. Right. And the applications that work while you're driving might require a lot more scrutiny, and so there will be that evaluation process and assessment process. So it's not just dropping an app straight to the car. It's quite different.
So in the sense of again, I was thinking the way that Apple had defined user interface guidelines for its apps.
Right.
You know, there's, I don't know that necessarily you're in a position to define those yet, but that's something you'd like to work toward how apps should work safely in a car. Tim writes in asking about, are you designing the interface primarily around speech recognition and voice to text versus, display screens? And I think part of what you're saying is that there's a range of interactions here.
That's right. Yeah. I think speech is important, text to speech is important, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the lives of our consumers get simpler, not more complex. So just because we have text to speech, it doesn't mean we bombard the driver with speech announcements during the course of their drive. And just because they can use voice activation, it doesn't mean that we force them to use voice when there's a nice large screen right in front of them and there's a clear single touch point that can get a job done. So it's really a question of using all the modalities that are available at the comfort of the vehicle to be able to combine the user and human-machine interaction, so screen and voice.
So one of the things when I visited you in Dearborn, I saw the Ford's Distraction Lab.
That's right.
And it's kind of a driver simulation environment where actually, unbeknownst to the test driver, they're presented with a number of challenges, such as their cell phone ringing, radio, various things, and while driving, seeing how they deal with it. So that's part of what you're testing is to understand even human behavior.
Absolutely, yeah. We do a lot of that, an extensive amount of testing. That's a fascinating tool. It's a large capital investment, but really to make sure that we can validate a lot of our assumptions around the design of the user interface.
But it's interesting in some ways that you're not just able to deal with kind of technology, you might say in a pure form. You really are dealing with a driver in certain constraints.
Right.
There's human behavior, just as even though we pass laws about cell phone usage in cars, it doesn't necessarily change the underlying behavior.
Yes.
How can you, deal with those kinds of issues? How can technology actually assist in making that more safe, a more safe environment inside a car?
Yeah, no, we refer to this as the last inch problem. It's not the last mile problem of bringing great broadband and related content to the car that we're working on. We have great partners and there's a whole ecosystem that's working on that. What we are trying to do is to define and solve the last inch problem. And that is, how do you make sure that the interface in the vehicle is secure, is safe, it's usable, it doesn't compromise privacy in any way, and it's highly reliable. So it's really the security, the safety, the usability, the privacy, and reliability that you're working on.
So we've been talking about safety, but Jay's asking a question about security. And I think we mean there like data security, privacy. References, I think it was on the wires last week about some hackers getting into the OBD2 systems and that there's weak security there and various things can be done there.
Right. Yeah, I think a number of things can be done, will have to be done. Just like with the internet at 0 miles an hour, when things got connected, there were security, new security I guess, challenges that were presented, and a whole system of developers and communities came together, and really organizations and thought processes and formal systems came together to protect those networked computers in the context of these new security threats. We will certainly, as we begin to network cars, network things that move, you're going to see something along the lines of new ways to look at new threats, new security challenges, and certainly a whole new community trying to address that and trying to build solutions for that, new systems and new enterprise activity. So I think clearly the fact that the threat is there has to be recognized. We have to get the best of minds to address those. But the fact that the threat is there shouldn't be a reason to stay apart and shouldn't be a reason to stay disconnected, because the value proposition, the overall benefit, is significantly more in being connected than it is in being isolated. That's the reality of the world. We all have experienced the internet at 0 miles an hour. This is really about trying to bring the internet to the road and bring all the value associated with that, bearing in mind the risks, of course.
Right. And it's kind of, I mean, it's an interesting, I would imagine it's an interesting position to be in, to be exploring this within sort of a very large company that has a lot at stake in every one of these areas. It's not like a little startup that says, well, if it doesn't work, we just fold, right? You have regulations and regulators. You have your own, probably a very conservative approach to a lot of these things. So you could probably see what's possible, and you have to loop back and say what.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What can we do reasonably?
That's right. I mean, I think the reality is that in anything that we do on the car, we have to be really, really sensitive to the very harsh and demanding environment in which the car operates, both from the standpoint of making sure that the driver and passengers are safe, and from the standpoint of making sure that the roadways themselves are not impacted in any negative way, and certainly the environment in a more holistic way. So we're very sensitive to that. We're taking all the measures to make sure we can scrutinize these developments in that context.
Yeah, there's a couple questions here that kind of relate to it, because I think this is actually the most interesting area. I think we can get hung up in our people tweeting and doing things in their car, but the idea that cars communicating with each other, being able to, I think there was one of the apps I saw in this that, to be able to compare how your car performs over the same route as other cars, is very interesting and very difficult to do today. I mean, it can kind of be done, but if it's done passively, meaning it's already it's a byproduct of driving. So this idea of Paul writes, cars communicating data to other cars with no human interaction. That's really one of the big areas, isn't it?
Right. So I think it's really getting machines to talk to machines, if you will, cars to talk to cars. What's different about cars is that they move at high speeds. What's different about cars is that the location and other contextual information changes rapidly. So it's sort of a special case of machines. It's a special case, therefore, of the Internet of Things that talk to each other. And as you look at all this, obviously there's some concerns around security that's been raised earlier on, and all the best experts will come together to address that. In fact, we might have a whole new wave of studies associated with that, and a new generation of experts. But there's also a huge benefit around doing all this. All the benefit we've seen at 0 miles an hour. We want to bring that to the road, if you will.
Right. Just I would say, with the history of Twitter, the Twitter stream being put into the Library of Congress, who would have thought that they would have sufficient value to do that? And to say if that billion cars on the road had a data stream that was available for just research even, but even value creation in the commercial sense, that's pretty fascinating. The other side that people are interested in, and Tim is asking about this, can you provide an API or SDK so that app developers can get access to existing onboard computers and data? Again, the diagnostic kind of services that are sort of available through a port today, but it's proprietary interface and the data's proprietary, kind of messy. But a lot of people do want to know. I see this so much like in the cyclist community or the jogging community. People want data based on the activities. So to some degree, it's been locked up in cars. How do we free that data, make it available to individuals that want to, just get at that data?
Yeah, that's the journey we're on. The research platform that really does allow access to vehicle messages and vehicle state is a first step in trying to be able to understand what it takes to put that information together, what we need to do to make sure that, of course, it doesn't compromise safety and security. And so we're in a learning phase, but we are committed to the game. We're committed to the game of creating an open platform that brings unusual communities together brings the big players, brings the new players, brings people who thought they couldn't commute, couldn't program to a car together to make all this happen.
Right, right. So it's kind of interesting to me that, you know, if we started with, there was a generation of mechanics, you know, that they knew how cars worked, and then we said, and then the cars became electronic, and many of those mechanics no longer could work on those cars. But we're almost starting to understand those electronics in ways that we can open them up. And I was thinking that what we're missing, in a way, is the interfaces to those electronics.
Right.
You know,
right.
how I say, like, the interface to a VCR is clumsy and nobody can figure out how to change the clock. Sometimes in your car you're like that too. It's say, like, I know there's a clock in here, but daylight savings time, I have to change it. So how can we just, even those kind of interactions and interfaces can be made a lot easier?
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously when we say open, we have to manage this openness, and we have to manage this openness to make sure that there's no compromise to the basic vehicle function. So yes, we are committed to creating a platform for open innovation, but we're doing this in the context of making sure that there's no compromise to safety. And having said that, I'd say that we really want to welcome the developers and the community out there to start looking at a car as something that's programmable. Something that is essentially a platform in which they can get data from elsewhere, mash up data where relevant, and make that available to the car, or get data from the car and make that part of the mashup to ultimately provide value, value for the road, if you will.
Yeah. Catherine, if you could bring up the Twitter page for AJ the Fiesta, I just want to see where it is, what it's twittering, because despite all the serious developer talk here, what'll get picked up in the media is you have a car tweeting, which is kind of, it's certainly a fun thing. But so part of that is you've written scripts or other things to kind of take the data and then figure out what the appropriate message is in the sense of what it resonates to.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think
it says, I used to feel sad, but now I'm happy, or something like that.
Right. So, no, I think the key point is that, well, some people might say, well, what's the point of showing these emoticons, if you will?
Right.
You know, I know my expression, I know the expression of the mood of my passengers, so I don't want to be reminded of, you know, I don't want the car telling me how it feels. Why bother? But really, the underlying science and the technology motivation for all this is expression of machines, and expression of machines through various data streams, and the value that can be created by combining these data streams and creating information, new forms of information that really become relevant for the road, relevant for the back office, relevant for maintaining vehicles, relevant for maintaining your life, perhaps. So, you know, I think this is not a disjoint and sort of unconnected world we live in. And so the car, and cars in general, cars and trucks and everything on the road, these 1 billion things that are out there that move fast, you know, essentially need to be part of a data stream, both providing data and using data, ultimately to generate value for one's life.
So what's the applications in the sustainability or green area that you think this will?
Well, just a few examples. If you want to now take the greenest path back home, you can do that today. There's mechanisms of going and getting information from various sources and figuring out where there's least traffic congestion and planning your route accordingly. But it might just be fun if you have a record of green routes based on consumer experiences and based on how the cars essentially spoke about the actual fuel consumption at different times of the day, different days of the week, and different seasons, and different cultural contexts, whether there's a ball game going on or not. But essentially, if machines started speaking, if cars started expressing this, there might be very clever ways to mash that up and then present very, very relevant directions to you if you want to be if you want to be green. You could so essentially choose routes, but now routes not just crafted by human beings, but crafted by the fact that you had machines that were contributing to the large database from which you can discern patterns that have to do with green driving.
Okay. Do you think that, is there any research to show that this kind of data or feedback on driving changes people's behavior? I've always thought that, for instance, if I could put on a display on a teenager's car, how much not how many miles they went, but how much it cost them to drive that trip. You know, like it was like $3.50 to drive a mile to the store.
Right.
That kind of translating miles into some meaningful measure would be very useful.
That's right. That's one aspect. The other aspect was really, you reminded me of something else. It had to do with stop signs that perhaps speak, and really the idea is that if children are going through driver's ed, and now there's a driver's ed 2.0 component to this application, the driver's ed 2.0 app, could essentially ask students to slow down at stop signs, and when they do, tune down their loud stereo system and play in a little story around a stop sign there. The stop sign story, each stop sign has a slightly different story, as we know. Some stop signs have pretty horrific stories, and others don't see much action around them. But the schools, the local schools and the local sheriff's office could get together, create a mashup of that data, and now all of a sudden stop signs are speaking the stop signs around schools and neighborhoods, and that becomes if you will, a tool for driver's ed 2.0. So there's various apps that could come out of that kind of a mashup of data.
Okay. Is there research about new forms of controls or interfaces, in a sense, to improve drivers' abilities? Whether in terms of not just the navigation in the sense of finding somewhere, but you look at an airplane cockpit. And there was a story on that in the Times recently, just how complex it is. We don't. They have to be trained for hours and hours, and to some degree, the amazing thing about a car is how little training people have to walk in and use it. But perhaps the cars of the future might require more training. When you mentioned driver's ed, maybe there are new ways of understanding the car and working with the car to both improve safety and performance.
Right. Clearly there is. And really one has to look at the car as a pretty rich user interface, as something that carries a pretty rich user interface. When you speak of user interface sitting in a home or a work environment, or walking around as pedestrians, you think of a little display screen or perhaps a loudspeaker. But in the car, the entire seat could be a user interface. That could give you some feedback. And so the vehicle itself could give you feedback in terms of how stiff or how free the steering wheel is. So there's lots of things that come from really haptic feedback in conjunction with the visual feedback and the audible feedback, making a very, very rich multimodal user interface environment.
Okay. Anthony asked first he says that AI is still alive, artificial intelligence. Is there any idea about a really smart car, not just sort of having apps in a car, but are there ways that that AI might be part of the picture? Yeah,
AI, expert systems, learning, all this is an integral part of a system that has to deal with uncertainties, has to deal with idiosyncrasies, if you will, of the road, of the individual. And so clearly this is part of the strategy of trying to make the car not just an something in the context of apps, but really trying to make sure that the car is something that understands you, the operator, you, the owner, you, the user. And so these are not mutually exclusive. Just the fact that you have apps there doesn't mean we're forgetting AI, doesn't mean we're forgetting expert systems, doesn't mean we're forgetting cars that learn. It's all there.
Do you see the, automobiles and robotics sort of linking or connecting in various ways?
Yeah, in fact, the robotics framework toolkit that was used was really, in some sense, a cue to that. There's a lot of being able to program machines, but now program machines from the standpoint of end user convenience, also from the standpoint of learning, from the standpoint of understanding the environment. So you don't have to essentially teach the car more than maybe once or twice or thrice, and then the car gets it, so to speak. I think it's really important. That's a factor, and the reason why it's important is, again, it's a mechanism of reducing driver workload. If the driver has said something.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, there's a few areas like moving seats that some will remember positions and stuff, but there's a lot of things in a car that are tuned to the driver, and it's mechanically oriented. It's not intelligently oriented to remembering that and knowing.
So I think knowing who you are, knowing that this is how you set your preferences, but also, if you teach something special, that you don't have to teach it more than twice or thrice.
Okay, I'm going to say this is our last question because I think we have a short video to wrap up with, but fleet management. So if your company owns a lot of cars and perhaps wants to know where they are, when they'll be available, when one's coming back. That's a pretty good direction.
That's right. In fact, that is so close to reality that on the more production side of our efforts, we certainly are creating apps that are appropriate for fleets. It could be police fleets, it could be city services, it could be private fleets. Once you know what those suite of requirements are within that fleet, most certainly you can create.
You know, if you think of the different fleet applications, taxis, UPS trucks, FedEx trucks, and the like, which group are the most networked? I mean, in other words, like if you were to study them, you know, is one better than the other, or one is further along?
I guess the objectives are different. So the police fleets are clearly you know, more public service and safety oriented and security oriented. The other folks, the FedEx and the UPS folks, I think clearly are very sophisticated and advanced, and they are. And they're a lot more global in terms of the tools they use, because you just have to have a solution that fits everywhere. I think it's, I wouldn't be able to say which fleet is or which type of fleet is better necessarily. Other than
but I was thinking in some ways of an app that is, like, here are the 5 things I have to do. Give me a route that is most efficient,
relevant to,
rather than my punching in specific addresses and go there, or these are the places I normally go, and remembering that. Well, let me, one thing I want to get back to is just for the, you know, makers are enthusiasts, and I think they're going to be coming to the fair this week, and and they're going to see cars. They're going to get this idea that there's an opportunity to build apps for cars, whether for experimental purposes, in hobbyist purposes, or commercial purposes. So where can they get started? How can they get, you know, where do they connect?
So there's a couple of websites and links that we could provide when you come over there, and we will certainly be publishing this. On the more production side, we have a URL that we'd be happy to send out later. And what we're doing there is, at this point, registering enthusiasts, people who want to work on this or get some information on APIs, get some information on the SDKs or specific kinds of ideas they may have, but not just ideas, actual solutions they may want to bring. And they might say, gee, I wish I had access to these vehicle messages. And so we're inviting all those people to come and sign up, and then we have, internally we're developing a process to hand out the necessary toolkits and be able to make this. Well,
I know the magazine Make we'd very much like to keep in touch with this and follow it, because this is a really interesting space for us. You know, in many ways we're trying to connect the physical and digital worlds, and have a lot of people, I think, working in that space.
Yeah, we'd love to give you perhaps a few pages worth of information.
And I think the other side is, I'd love to hear from people, particularly in this audience and beyond, of ideas for apps. You know, I think that's, you almost have to start with design of what do you want to do and what's in place to be able to do it. And I think the interesting thing, if this really works out, as I said, you know, calling something 2.0 and just saying it's innovation, it doesn't work unless that's a platform for more people to be involved, for increasing participation, and really getting outside of sometimes the narrow realms of expertise that might be even within a company, and say we see things this way. Well, the whole world, people out in the outside see things from different perspectives.
Absolutely.
And so I think what we really want to say is, if this is successful, you know, are you getting new kinds of people in here? Are there people that really didn't think about cars, but they were thinking about the internet at speed? They were thinking about the problems that they had as users, which leads them to build applications, rather than that they were inside the industry looking outside at customers.
Right. No, we absolutely embrace the fact that there's a lot more smart people out there than there are inside any firm, and certainly within Ford. While there's lots of smart people within Ford, we recognize that the crowds outside are large, and the crowds outside want to come for perhaps very different reasons from what the crowds inside might have been working towards. So our commitment is really to build these platforms that attract everyone, the crowds outside, and certainly the folks within.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you very much, Prasad, for taking the time to talk to us. I'd like to thank our audience for joining us today. And we have a short video, just another American Journey wrap up here. I think it gives a little bit, it's some of the same, but in case you came in late, it's some of the applications. And that's really what excites me. It's these platforms become places where people think of new ideas. And they think that something's possible that they weren't able to do previously. So I hope I'll see you all at Maker Faire this weekend, Saturday and Sunday in the Bay Area. I'd say Prasad's in Dearborn. He works at the Ford R&D Center, which is across the street literally from the Henry Ford, where we'll be creating Maker Faire July 31st and August 1st this summer, and I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
So continuing to collaborate. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Innovation is the fuel for our future, as you can easily imagine. And what we did was to set up a course here to work with the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor and provide tools and exciting opportunities for students to engage and use those tools to create features and applications for future vehicles. And we worked together to create applications the students developed here and showed how they could use social networks and open up a whole window of opportunities that at the end of the day would make the lives of our consumers a little simpler and certainly make the ride a lot more fun.
This has been a really exciting opportunity for us. Being able to work with Ford has been tremendous, Microsoft and Intel. The thing that it's really meant the most to me is giving our students access to a real industrial partner so they can get their hands dirty on something that really makes a difference. And it's something that's in our backyard, which is a Michigan native. That's been kind of nice for me.
My name is Paul Coldren and I'm with Team Armadillo, and we built a vehicle fuel economy tracking program. What you can do is, as you're driving the car, you can record your fuel economy and it will compare it in real time with what other people have gotten driving the same route in the past. You can also record routes. After you've recorded a route, you can upload it to a website. Once you're on the website, you can compare your route with other people who have driven the same route and figure out who has the best route between two landmarks.
My name's Colin. I'm with Team Bobcat. We built a caravan tracking application. So the idea being that instead of using your cell phones to keep track of everybody, you just have a map that you can see your entire group on. Everybody signs up on a website. You put in your caravan information, you get a key, and share that key with your friends, and then you can see where each other are. You also have the ability to look up restaurants and gas stations along the way and share that information with your friends and be able to meet up with them and to warn people of road hazards or where you're going or what you need to stop for.
One of the things that I think is really compelling about the class is that it allows our students to be very entrepreneurial, to go out and do interesting computer science projects in industry, the vehicular industry, that's really compelling to the state of Michigan. It allows them to see that, hey, I can do something really interesting here in Michigan and not have to go out to San Francisco to do a really entrepreneurial computer science project.
I think the most positive experience in this class was really seeing what kind of amazing different ideas that the students all came up with. These are things that we hadn't thought of before, and I think that really the next step that we're looking forward to is this road trip and possibly just to see could some of these applications be implemented in production.